Hello and welcome to Grouchy Old Geeks episode 54. My name's Steve, my co-host is Scott.
Hello. Hello, welcome back. So in this episode's main feature, inspired a little bit by WandaVision being a spin-off show, but just doing something different and interesting, we're going to talk about spin-off shows from other shows, like what we liked, what we didn't like, how they could have maybe done something a bit better, given a different twist on the universe. One of the things that we did before we prepped for the episode was we decided that basically there was going to be a ban on Star Trek because there's been so many Star Trek spin-offs.
Yes.
That we're just not, and we've talked about Star Trek many times, so we're not going to talk about Star Trek, even though it's obviously super famous for doing many successful spin-offs.
Yeah.
So do you want to kick us off and talk about the first spin-off show that's on your list?
Okay, so there's 4 spin-offs from this original show.
Wow.
And I think I've watched some of most of them. So the original show is Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
And the spin-offs are the Sarah Jane Adventures, Class, K9, and Torchwood.
Yes, and I've seen some of. I've not seen all of those. I've seen some of Torchwood, some of Sarah Jane Adventures, some of. I think you got the name of the K9 one wrong. I think it's called K9 and Company.
All right, okay,
but not the other one that you mentioned. Didn't sound familiar to me at all.
Class, yes, it's like a teen drama in high school. With kids set within the Doctor Who universe. Yeah, right. I've not watched any of that one, but I'm aware of it. So I watched Torchwood. I watched it quite a lot back in the day, even to the point where they did like an American crossover in an attempt to launch an American version of the show. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that. That must have been after I stopped watching it. But I didn't stop watching it because I hated it. I just kind of drifted away from it, I think.
So they did this 2-part one where Captain Jack there's some sort of alien invasion or something, and Mekhi Phifer, who's an American actor who's been in a few things like ER and other things back in the day, he ended up being in it, and he ended up getting a blood transfusion from Captain Jack to save his life. And because of that, he sort of inherited Captain Jack's powers. And the idea was to then spin off into American version with him and his own team of people doing things. And I've no idea if it even, spawned, if it even continued. I don't think it did go for very long if it did happen. But yeah, so what did you think about Torchwood? What did you think of it when it first started?
I enjoyed it. It was never something like I felt like I was invested in Doctor Who because I've been watching it, my whole life pretty much. Torchwood, I never took to it as massively, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a perfectly fine show. I thought it was quite well cast. I thought it was entertaining storylines. What did you think to it?
I liked the idea of it to begin with. I think it was quite exciting because Doctor Who can get a bit boring because even though he can travel through all of time and space, he inevitably ends up in London on Earth.
Yeah.
In medieval, in kind of Victorian times or Elizabethan time, it's just like, oh Lord, and the show has to appeal to all 4 quadrants of the audience demographic, so that it's Saturday evening tea television show. Grannies can watch it, little kids can watch it, adults can watch it, and they all get something from it. Torchwood allowed them to do a lot more adult stories, go in different places, and scratch the itch that you can't always get from Doctor Who, but do different kind of I don't want to say adult because that's not necessarily always adult. It's just exploring different things that you couldn't do on Doctor Who because it focused very much around one person, and Torchwood was more of the more familiar ensemble cast. So you could have someone who's grumpy and doesn't get on with everybody, and they don't suddenly at the end of the show have a change of heart and then they're all okay and they're happy with the Doctor again. It's like you don't have to get along. And I like that you could have an interesting dynamic with different characters, with different strengths and different abilities. And I think as it went on, it went downhill a bit. But to begin with, I think it was a really good idea. And it was the first spin-off that we'd ever have from Doctor Who that had been going for 40 years at that point or whatever it was.
Yeah, so I think K9 and Company was a very short-lived show that came before that. But I think Torchwood was kind of, not to insult K9 and Company, I think Torchwood was kind of the first proper spin-off.
Yeah. It's probably something they talked about for years and they never got around to it. And then this kind of launched it. And they've been doing it in America with shows for years and years. So what's the next one on your list then?
So I've got one show. There's two spin-offs, both of which I found were kind of. So actually, let me start again. It's two different versions of the same show, each of which had a spin-off that I think were both kind of failed opportunities in some way.
Okay, interesting.
And that show is Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, so which do you think is the failed opportunity?
So, well, kind of both of the spin-offs. So the spin-off from the original Battlestar Galactica, which was a show set in the 70s, was the absolutely terrible, and I don't know if you remember this or not, Galactica 1980.
Yes.
Which was, so the whole point in Battlestar Galactica was they were trying to find this mythical place called Earth. And the idea of Galactica 1980 is that they found it, and it was basically them trying to settle down on Earth, which is a really, really interesting idea that they could have done a lot with. But instead, we left with Galactica 1980, which was an absolutely dreadful show.
I remember the kids had kind of powers that they could almost defy gravity and jump really high and stuff like that. And that's about all I remember of it because I think it was so bad. I think I stopped watching it even back then. It
was absolutely diabolically bad. But it's a shame because the idea of, they're humans, but from a very high technology place, they're running away from the Cylons, and they've found this mythical place that they were trying to find, and trying to settle down on the planet, try and prepare the planet for a potential future invasion. There's loads of really, really compelling things that they could do and really nice ideas, but we're left with just this second-rate show that I'm presuming that they made because it was cheaper to film Battlestar Galactica in 1980s Los Angeles than it was to pretend to set it in space.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, with all the sets and stuff. It's like, we'll just film in the park. Way! And they run around the park and the kids jump up and down and stuff. Yeah. It wasn't great.
Yeah.
And what was the other spin-off?
So the other spin-off, which I'll be honest, is a show, I think it only lasted one season. It might have been two. I think it was just one season though. And actually, I really, really liked it. I've got a strong feeling though that I could be the only one.
I think you are.
Okay, yeah. And actually part of the reason for liking it might possibly be because at the time it was being filmed, my office was basically on the set, and I could look at it being filmed from my office, and I could walk past like the library next door to my office was turned into a Capricorn building, and opposite it was like the school. It was all going on, and I've got lots of pictures of me in these locations with like signs in Capricorn and stuff like that. And I've given it away because the show is Caprica, and I really liked it. But again, it's nowhere near as bad as Galactica 1980. But I still want to hold it up as kind of a missed opportunity. So to do a show about how the Cylons came to be Cylons and what humanity did to mess up their relationship with them that caused this big, rift. There's lots of really interesting things that you can do with that. And I do as much fondness as I have for the show, and I really am very fond of it. like we were saying, I'm the only one, and I think there's loads of interesting things that they could have done that they just failed to do.
I think the inherent problem with the show, especially with prequels, is you already know the final destination.
Yeah.
It's one of the main problems, not the only one, with the Star Wars prequels.
Yeah.
That you know what happens to all the main characters at the end of it, and you're just ticking things off, waiting for it to happen. And in this, you're like, well, at some point they're going to fail to understand the machines that they're developing. They're going to fall apart. There's going to be a disagreement, and the machines are going to go to war with them. So you're just waiting for that. I mean, the way it's not a spoiler really, but the way that the new Ronald D. Moore Battlestar Galactica show ends is not very clear. The ending is a bit ambiguous, and it perhaps would have been more interesting to go forward into the unknown where you don't know anything. Or if they were doing a prequel, it would be to go back even further so that there's no direct ties. Like they're doing a Game of Thrones spin-off that's something like 1,000 years before. And it's, as far as I know, it's not really been explored much in the books. It might have been in, George Martin's world-building Bible for the whole of the world. But beyond that, there are not going to be any massive connections. You're not waiting for someone to turn up and go, oh, yeah, in 10 years' time, he loses his arm and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. There's none of that. So maybe they could have done that to make it work a bit more independent. But because it was an interesting society that they'd created with this different mythology, different religions, the 12 kind of signs of the zodiac representing the 12 planets, because it wasn't Earth, it was 12 other, planets that they lived on. And so I don't know, I was just waiting for things to happen, and I just felt a bit bored after a while. But as you say, it lasted one season in 2010, and that was it, unfortunately.
Yeah, interesting idea. And like you say, going forwards could have been really cool, because I think one of the themes that was sort of starting to come out towards the end of the main Battlestar Galactica show was that actually this is kind of a cyclical thing that's happened, times before, and is continuing to happen. So actually seeing the cycle begin again in the future would have been really interesting. But yeah, as much funness as I have for it, I definitely see it as an interesting idea, but kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So the next one I was going to talk about is it is a spin-off really, because it kind of spawned a whole universe of shows. Is that what began with Arrow in 2012? So you think, oh, it's not that long ago. And you think, oh, Caprica was 2010. Arrow started in 2012.
Wow.
It wasn't that long after. And Arrow spawned, let me get my list, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Supergirl. Indirectly, you got things like Black Lightning, Superman and Lois, which is coming up, Batwoman. I'm sure I'm forgetting some other ones. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that have, some have been in development, some have come and gone. They were going to do Black Canaries one, that never happened in the end. Yeah, all came out of Arrow with Stephen Amell way back in 2012, which is now 11 years.
Wow, that's incredible. That it was
9 years. 9 years ago, isn't it?
Even then, that's still amazing that it was that long ago.
Yeah.
So what do you think before we talk about the spin-offs, what do you think to Arrow itself?
I think it started really, really well. And the first 5 years had a very tight core concept of the thing of every season of the show would reflect in flashbacks one of his years spent on the island where he was training and becoming this weapon. And he then came back to the city and started fighting for his city and so on. The problem is, in that first season, he was really hardcore. He killed people. He was, taking no soft approach to criminals. And then they started to kind of lose their nerve a bit, I think. And then they made him, he's not going to kill people anymore. He's just going to wound them. And you're like, well, oh, okay. And then he's told this person and that person, oh, all right now. Now everybody knows. And it went on for 8 seasons in the end. And I think like Supernatural, as fun as some of those later episodes are, if they'd stuck to the original core premise, it might have been a tighter show and a better show. But that's just me, Did you watch it at all back in the day?
I watched it, but I didn't really stick with it. But kind of a bit like Torchwood. It wasn't because I decided to give up on it because I didn't like it. It was just something that I never enthused me enough to want to stick with it. Having said that, the one spin-off from it that I watched, I definitely haven't kept up with it, but the one spin-off that I watched at least a couple of complete seasons of was Supergirl.
Yeah.
And there was the crossover between Supergirl and the Flash show, wasn't there?
Yes.
I think just as Flash was starting. But I never watched Flash, or actually I don't think I've seen any of those other spin-offs that you were talking about as well.
Yeah, Legends of Tomorrow and stuff.
So how did you find the spin-offs?
Flash there again started off really, really well. It was really interesting. That first season of Flash, actually, you could just watch the first season of Flash, and it's not standalone from the rest, but there's a fairly good story that runs through that whole first season, and it's really good. It's really, really good. And after a while, it just got really formulaic. He built up a team of allies who've all got powers, and then they go out and fight different people in the city. And it's like, we've had that for Arrow for, 6 years at that point or whatever it was. And it just felt a bit like, you could have done so much more with it, but it just fell into familiar patterns. And then they brought out Supergirl, and then the same sort of thing happened again. Starts interesting, starts quite different, trying new things, and then it just settles down and becomes something a bit homogenous like the others. The only one that's remained consistently bonkers is Legends of Tomorrow.
Right, which I've never seen.
Right, every season is completely batshit crazy. Every few episodes they do something weird and different. They're constantly jumping through time and doing different things. And it has seasonal arcs as well, but it's really radical. People of the cast come and go. Some die, some leave. So it's the most weird. And everyone was thinking, it'll just be cancelled. And it's like, nope, it's now been going for something like 5-6 seasons. So just by being a bit different, which is probably a good thing, given that you've had 3 shows that became very, very similar.
So do you think the problem with these shows is that they come from an era, like, it's not that long ago, but they kind of come from an era where you're trying to do 22 or 24 episodes a season, whereas nowadays a season will be like 10 episodes and it'll be really tight and it'll be like just a really long movie or something like that. Do you think the problem stems from the fact that they just kind of had to fill the time a little bit?
Part of it, but also I think the core audience is much younger. It's, we're kind of at the tail end, the upper spectrum of the core audience now, I would say. And some of them, it's not, you can't even say that they don't want series that are connected and that have standalone episodes, because they've grown up in an era that they're used to shows that have seasonal arcs and that are connected. But it is an old model of TV. That's the problem. With so many new streaming platforms coming online all the time and so many things getting folded in, I wonder if the era of 22 episode seasons will soon die. And to be honest, from a storytelling perspective on TV, I think it can only be a good thing, especially with these kind of shows. Daredevil is still, for me, one of the best TV shows, superhero shows that have done on television, because that was on Netflix and it was 10, 12 episodes a season. And, quality goes up and down, but it's so tight and there's no fat on that show at all. Whereas you could watch the first 2 in a season and the last 2, and you'll probably be fine on some of these shows. because they all have previously on and just give you the highlight clips, and you're like, well, I'm up to speed now. Okay, forwards.
Yeah, completely. And I completely agree about Daredevil. Like Daredevil, that's a format that's kind of more common these days.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not to take anything away from Daredevil at all, but it felt when we were watching it that was something really new and refreshing and interesting.
Yeah, it was really special. And I did a rewatch recently and it was still really good. So what's your next one? Do you have any more?
So I've read out. So looking into this, it amazed me how many spin-off shows there were. Like there's hundreds of them.
Yep.
I kind of didn't want to mention this as one that I thought this was a missed opportunity. It could do so much better. But actually, it did such a great job as a spin-off. And I know it's a show that you really like. And I just wanted to kind of mention Buffy and its spin-off Angel. Yes,
that was on my list, yeah.
Yeah, because I'll be honest, I really kept up with Buffy. I didn't follow Angel as closely as I would have wanted, but that was because back in the day when Angel was on, it wasn't like Netflix where you can just like watch any episode at any time.
No,
it was much harder to keep up with.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't really stick with it. And because I'm a bit of a completionist, if I miss an episode, that show is dead to me until I can like watch that episode and then keep up with it. And with Angel, I just never managed to do that. But I know that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your opinion of Angel is higher than it is of Buffy.
I think so, yeah. I've rewatched Angel more than I've done. I did a rewatch within the last sort of 3 years of all of Angel, and it's a slight. You can do more in Angel than you can with Buffy, only because the first 4 or 5 seasons of Buffy is that she's restricted because she's in school, then she's in college or university, we'd say, and it's only kind of after that where she's trying to earn a living and get a job that the doors have kind of lifted a bit more. But at that point, some of the shackles are already in place, as it were. With Angel, they almost blow the show up at the end of every season and change the structure and the focus and the position of the show because they can. And there again, they can do more adult stories. So there aren't as many constraints. And some of the stuff they do in that show are brilliant. It's so good. And, the performances, we've talked about it before, one of the best transformations of one of the characters ever on TV starts in Buffy and finishes in Angel.
That's Cordelia? Oh, no, Wesley.
Wesley Wyndham-Pryce, who starts off as this nerdy, pathetic, cowardly watcher. And by the end of Angel, he's someone so different. So, and the acting, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It was a very adult show with very adult themes that they did get into, to be fair, on Buffy later on, but not in the same way. And there's probably more comedy in Buffy. There was some balance that had to be in Angel because it was a lot darker, but it wasn't to the same degree as Buffy. They recently, not to get into any of the stuff that's in the news, but recently somebody asked Sarah Michelle Gellar if she would be interested in a remake or a continuation of Buffy as her as an older woman, as someone more her own age, and she said no. If they did a remake or something, that would be fine, but she wouldn't want to continue with it. And I wonder what if they did a spin-off show now from that universe, because as we said, Marvel are doing spin-off from their thing, and CW and Flash and DC have done spin-offs from their shows. What if they did a spin-off now from the kind of Buffy and Angel verse? That would be an interesting idea to explore. Very
it would be, because at the end of Buffy, kind of the whole world had changed, hadn't it? Like the whole point of Buffy was into every generation a slave is born.
Yes.
But at the end of Buffy, which continued in the comics, like they did a Buffy season 8 and beyond that, possibly.
Yeah, beyond comics. That, they did like up to like 10 or 12 or something. Yeah.
But the ending of the TV show was that actually every potential Slayer became a Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really interesting thing to explore. But the show had run out at that point. That happened in like the final episode of season 7.
Yeah, and slight spoiler for those who haven't seen the end of season 7. There's no more Sunnydale, so they can't carry on telling stories in that town. They have to go somewhere else. So I don't know, but doing a show now would be an interesting approach. It'll never happen, but there are ways to explore it. They've done it in the comics on Buffy and Angel. I had one more
Go for it.
quick one, which I haven't actually watched any of the spin-offs because I don't want to, but I thought I'd mention it.
Are you going to talk about Baywatch Nights as being a spin-off of Baywatch?
I love Baywatch Nights. No. Walking Dead and all of the spin-offs from The Walking Dead.
So I watched the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead.
Yep.
And enjoyed it. But like I've said with other shows, I just kind of drifted off of them. But it was a conscious decision to stop watching The Walking Dead. Not because I really disliked it, but just because I felt like everything that this show has to give me, it's already given me.
Yeah.
I just don't have the energy to try and keep up with it anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'm very dimly aware of shows like Fear the Walking Dead.
Yep.
And spin-off shows, but I know absolutely nothing about them other than the spin-offs from The Walking Dead.
Yeah, so there's Fear the Walking Dead, which is set in another part of the country, and eventually they have a crossover. It's almost like just after the outbreak of what's happening, whereas in the show, it's a bit different. And then the other spin-off that they've done, which I think is now going to be like a limited run, is where there are some teenagers who are the main characters, and they're the first generation to grow up in that world, not having known anything before. Mm-hmm. So they've been born since walkers have been around. So
that's an interesting idea.
It is, but I still think it's just going to fall into the same kind of traps as the other shows. Like for the same reason as you, I watched the first few seasons and I just got kind of bored. And I was like, we've done this a lot. And it's just the same rinse and repeat cycle. Mm-hmm. Things aren't really evolving. I'm not seeing the world change. I'm not seeing the stories change. Characters come and go because they keep getting eaten. So they bring in new characters. And I'm like, yeah, now you're just apart from 1 or 2 who stay, the rest are, get wiped out and someone else comes in. And I'm like, nah, I just got bored. So, but the teenagers thing, I don't know. Unless they can do something really interesting with it. But I've just not bothered. I know it's huge. It's such a big monster of a show. But I think given everything that's happened in the last few years, such dark TV is going to probably tail off for a while. Mm-hmm. Especially the fact that it's based upon a contagion.
You're much more positive about that than I am, because I have a strong feeling that the TV season of 2022 is going to be, every sci-fi show is going to be about pandemics. I think they can be so lacking in imagination. They can do the most imaginative things, but I think that just in this case, every single writer out there is going to be pitching as a showrunner for a contagion-based sci-fi show. And I think we're just going to be, I think for the next 3 or 4 years, that's all there's going to be on TV.
I'll be watching a lot of repeats of The Mandalorian then.
I really hope that I'm wrong. I really do.
Do you have any more?
No, there was some other things I put on the list, but nothing in particular worth mentioning, to be honest. No, I think I'll leave it there. Okay,
because there's so many from all the Stargate shows and the CSI shows.
Oh yeah, the Stargate shows I've got listed.
24,
obviously, the 3 spin-offs from Happy Days.
Yeah,
Laverne and Shirley.
Mm-hmm.
Jodie Love
Chachi, yeah.
And Mork and Mindy was a spin-off from Happy Days.
Yes, of course. Yes, Nanu, and
yeah.
Baywatch and Baywatch Nights. Never forget that. There are so many shows. There are so many shows we could have talked about, but
there was hundreds. I was amazed at the number of spin-offs. Like, it's literally hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
It's just incredible.
Yeah.
Shows I never even knew were spin-offs.
Like what?
Spin-offs. I can't. I did most of them. I didn't bother to write down.
Right.
But, just loads of stuff out there. It was crazy.
Mm. Well, I didn't realize that the Bionic Woman was a spin-off of The $1 Million Man until fairly recently. But it makes sense when you think about it. But all these things get remade and rebooted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of your favorite shows and favorite spin-offs? Are there any spin-offs that are superior to the original? That would be an interesting thing. If you've got any opinions on that, get in touch and let us know. But in the meantime, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.